The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Deadwood Ridge. The town, nestled in the heart of the Wild West, was a place where fortunes were made and lost, and where lawlessness often overshadowed the law. Wooden shanties and saloons lined the main street, their faded paint and worn facades telling tales of countless years and even more stories. The quiet of the late afternoon was disrupted by the rhythmic clop of hooves on the parched earth. A lone rider, silhouetted against the setting sun, approached the town. The rider's horse kicked up a swirl of dust as it trotted forward, and the rider's silhouette was a striking figure against the golden horizon. The townsfolk, used to the comings and goings of various travelers, took note of this newcomer with wary eyes. The rider wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of their face, and a long, weather-beaten duster coat flapped in the wind. The horse, a sleek and powerful steed, seemed equally as enigmatic as its rider. As the rider dismounted in front of the old saloon, the once bustling establishment now a shadow of its former self, the door creaked open with a groan. Inside, the saloon's dim interior was illuminated by a few flickering oil lamps. A poker game was in progress at one of the tables, accompanied by low murmurs and the occasional clinking of glasses. The bartender, polishing a glass with a rag, looked up with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The rider walked in, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. Silence fell over the room as every eye turned to observe the newcomer. The rider made their way to the bar, the sound of their spurs creating a rhythm that seemed to heighten the tension. Whiskey, the rider's voice was gravelly and unyielding, a stark contrast to the soft hum of conversation that had resumed as quickly as it had ceased. The bartender poured a shot and slid it across the bar with a practiced ease. "We don't see many folks like you around these parts," he remarked, studying the rider closely. The rider took a sip of the whiskey, savoring its burn, and then placed the glass down with a deliberate motion. "Just passing through," came the curt reply. "Heard there might be trouble brewing." The room's atmosphere shifted. The mention of trouble piqued the interest of the patrons, many of whom had their own reasons for wanting to stay on the good side of the law, or at least on the side of their own interests. The saloon's owner, a burly man with a thick mustache named Rufus McAllister, stepped forward from behind a poker table. "Trouble, you say?" Rufus's voice was laced with a hint of challenge. "We've had our share, but what makes you think it's any different now?" The rider leaned forward, their hat casting a shadow over their face. "Name's Jack Carter," they said. "I'm here on a lead about a missing cattle baron, a few stolen horses, and some peculiar happenings around these parts. Might be there's a connection." A murmur of surprise and curiosity rippled through the saloon. Missing cattle barons and stolen horses were not uncommon in the Wild West. But they were always worth investigating. The town had its share of secrets, and the arrival of a determined rider promised to stir the pot. Rufus eyed Jack Carter with a mix of skepticism and interest. "Well, if you're looking for trouble, you found it. Folks around here don't take kindly to outsiders poking around." Jack's eyes, visible beneath the brim of the hat, were steely and unyielding. "I'm not here to cause trouble," they said. "I'm here to find answers." And if there's a threat, I'll deal with it. The room fell into a tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional clink of a glass, or the shuffle of a deck of cards. The patrons, intrigued by the rider's calm demeanor and mysterious aura, continued to watch with a mix of apprehension and fascination. As the night wore on, Jack Carter remained at the bar, quietly observing the interactions around them and sipping their whiskey. They were a lone figure in a town teetering on the edge of lawlessness, but their presence was already beginning to unravel the threads of a larger story. Outside, the night deepened, and the cold wind swept through the streets of Deadwood Ridge. The stars above twinkled like distant fires, casting their pale light over a town full of secrets and shadows. Jack Carter's arrival was just the beginning, a harbinger of the adventure and danger that lay ahead. In the quiet of the saloon, as the patrons resumed their activities, the sense of anticipation grew. The mystery of the missing cattle baron, the stolen horses, and the peculiar happenings were about to unfold, and the town of Deadwood Ridge was bracing itself for the arrival of a storm. Little did they know that Jack Carter, the lone rider, would be the catalyst for the changes to come. The sun rose with a crisp edge, illuminating the rugged landscape surrounding Deadwood Ridge. The town, once bustling with the activities of the previous evening, now lay in the stillness of a new day, its dust swirling gently in the morning breeze. Jack Carter had risen early, determined to dig deeper into the mystery that had brought them to this frontier town. The saloon, though it had been the center of last night's attention, was now quiet and deserted. Jack made their way to the sheriff's office, a modest building with a weather-beaten sign hanging precariously above the door. The office was a small, cluttered space filled with wanted posters, dusty files, and a lone desk that seemed to have seen better days. Inside, Sheriff Tom Bennett, a grizzled veteran of the law with a stern but weary demeanor, was seated behind his desk, looking over a stack of papers. His eyes, though tired, held a sharp intelligence that had kept him in his position despite the roughness of the town. As Jack entered, the sheriff looked up, his expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "Morning," he said gruffly. "What can I do for you?" Jack tipped their hat slightly in acknowledgement. "Sheriff Bennett, I'm Jack Carter. I've come to look into some recent troubles, missing cattle baron, stolen horses, and the like. I understand there's been some unusual activity around here." Sheriff Bennett studied Jack for a moment before gesturing to a chair. "Have a seat. I've heard about the trouble you're talking about. Been dealing with it as best as I can, but it's been a rough few weeks." Jack sat down, their posture relaxed but attentive. "I'd like to hear everything you know. Any leads or unusual occurrences?" The sheriff leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Well, it's been a mess. The cattle baron, Jacob Westwood, disappeared a few weeks ago. His ranch was found abandoned, and the horses were gone. No sign of struggle, no clues, just empty stalls." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And what about the stolen horses? Any idea where they might have ended up?" Bennett shook his head. "We've had reports of stolen horses before. But this seems different. There's talk of a gang operating in the area. Some folks say they're moving around the countryside, hitting ranches and homesteads. Jack nodded, absorbing the information. Do you have any idea who these people might be? Sheriff Bennett sighed, a hint of frustration in his voice. Some say it's the Black Creek Gang, but no one's seen them up close. They're elusive, always on the move, leaving no real trace. Jack thought for a moment. And what about Jacob Westwood's family? Have they been involved in any way? The sheriff's face darkened. Westwood's wife, Lila, has been trying to keep the ranch running, but she's on edge. She's been asking around, too. I reckon she might know more than she's letting on. Jack decided to visit the Westwood Ranch to speak with Lila and get a first-hand account of the situation. As they left the sheriff's office, Jack noticed a group of townsfolk gathered around the general store, speaking in hushed tones. The gossip was palpable, and Jack's arrival had clearly stirred up some curiosity. Following directions from the sheriff, Jack rode out of town and headed toward the Westwood Ranch. The journey took them across open fields and rolling hills, the landscape dotted with the occasional homestead and grazing cattle. The ranch itself was situated on a large plot of land, its once proud barns and corrals now showing signs of neglect. As Jack approached the main house, they were greeted by Lila Westwood, a woman in her early 30s with a determined expression etched into her face. Her eyes, though tired, held a glimmer of hope as she extended a hand in greeting. "You must be Jack Carter," Lila said, her voice steady despite the evident stress. "Sheriff Bennett told me you'd be coming. I'm grateful for your help." Jack tipped their hat in respect. "Mrs. Westwood, I'm here to help however I can. I understand you've been through a rough time." Lila nodded, her gaze sweeping over the ranch. "It's been difficult. My husband disappeared without a trace, and the horses were taken. I've been trying to keep things together, but it's hard without knowing what happened." Jack followed Lila into the house, where the interior was surprisingly well kept despite the outward signs of distress. The walls were adorned with family photos and mementos, a testament to the life that had once thrived here. As they sat in the living room, Jack noticed a framed photograph of Jacob Westwood, a tall man with a rugged appearance. Lila glanced at the photo with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Jacob was a good man," Lila said softly. "He'd never leave us without a word. I fear something terrible has happened to him." Jack leaned forward, their tone sympathetic but probing. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any strangers or odd behavior before Jacob disappeared?" Lila hesitated, then spoke. "There was a man, a drifter, who came around a few weeks before Jacob went missing. He seemed to be asking questions about our operations and the layout of the ranch. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time." Jack's interest was piqued. "Did he give you a name or any other details?" Lila shook her head. "No, he didn't. He left as abruptly as he arrived. I wish I'd paid more attention." Jack stood, their mind already racing with possibilities. "I'll look into it. If this drifter is connected to what happened, it could lead us to the truth. Lila nodded, her expression one of both relief and hope. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm counting on you. As Jack left the Westwood Ranch, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the landscape. The journey had only begun, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The mysterious drifter, the missing cattle baron, and the elusive gang were all threads that Jack would need to unravel. The Wild West was full of secrets and dangers, and Jack Carter was about to dive headfirst into a web of intrigue and peril. With each step, the mystery deepened and the stakes grew higher. The story of Deadwood Ridge was far from over, and the true adventure was just beginning. The following morning, the sky over Deadwood Ridge was a brilliant blue, with the sun rising steadily over the horizon. Jack Carter, having spent the previous night studying the notes and information gathered from the sheriff and Lila Westwood, was ready to take their next steps. The drifter mentioned by Lila was now a focal point of their investigation, and Jack was determined to find out more. Riding out of town, Jack followed a series of leads that might reveal the drifter's whereabouts. The journey took them across rugged terrain and through isolated homesteads, each one holding its own story. The landscape was vast and unforgiving, but Jack was no stranger to the harsh realities of the Wild West. The first stop was the local trading post, a modest establishment on the outskirts of town known for its supplies and local gossip. As Jack entered, the bell above the door jingled, and the owner, a burly man named Eli Turner, looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Eli," Jack said, tipping their hat. "I'm looking for information about a drifter who passed through here a while back. Heard he might have asked questions about the Westwood Ranch." Eli's brows furrowed as he thought. "A drifter, huh? Yeah, I remember someone like that. Didn't stay long, just enough to buy a few supplies and leave." Jack leaned against the counter, their tone casual but probing. "Do you remember anything about him? What did he look like? Any particular details?" Eli scratched his chin thoughtfully. He was a tall fella, with a bit of a rough look to him. Wore a faded coat, and had a scar on his left cheek. Didn't say much, just seemed like he was in a hurry. Jack's mind raced. A tall man with a scar was a distinctive enough description. Did he mention where he was headed next? Eli shook his head. Not really. Just that he was traveling west. Said something about searching for something or someone. Didn't make much sense to me at the time. Jack nodded, taking mental notes. Thanks, Eli. I appreciate your help. As Jack left the trading post, they considered the next move. Heading west was a broad direction, but it was a start. The trail was likely to be rough, with many miles of open land and few reliable landmarks. Jack mounted their horse and set off, following the general direction indicated by Eli. Hours passed as Jack rode through the untamed wilderness, the landscape changing from open plains to dense forests and rocky outcrops. The sun was high in the sky when Jack spotted a small cabin in the distance, partially obscured by the trees. It looked abandoned, but had potential to hold useful information. Dismounting, Jack approached the cabin cautiously. The wooden structure appeared old and weather-beaten, with broken windows and a sagging roof. As Jack opened the door, a cloud of dust billowed out, and the inside was dim and musty. The cabin had clearly been unused for some time. Jack's keen eyes scanned the interior for any signs of recent activity. On a dusty table, a few scattered papers caught their attention. Jack carefully picked them up, brushing off the dust. The papers were scribbled with notes and sketches that seemed to be related to the Westwood Ranch. One page had a crude map with markings indicating various locations, including the Westwood Ranch and other ranches in the area. Another page had detailed notes about the layout of the ranches, including descriptions of their security and key features. Jack's pulse quickened. It was clear that the drifter had been mapping out the area with a purpose. The information in the cabin could be crucial to understanding the drifter's motives and connections. Just as Jack was about to leave, they heard a rustling sound outside. Instinctively, Jack reached for their revolver and moved to a window to peer out. A figure was approaching the cabin, a man in a worn coat and hat, moving with an air of familiarity and purpose. Jack ducked behind a piece of furniture and waited. The man entered the cabin, his eyes scanning the room. He was the same drifter described by Eli, tall, with a scar on his cheek. He looked around, seemingly unaware of Jack's presence. The drifter's gaze fell on the papers on the table. Jack watched as the man quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them into a satchel. Jack's heart raced. It was clear that the drifter was not just a casual traveler, but someone with a vested interest in the ranches and their secrets. As the drifter turned to leave, Jack decided it was time to act. They quietly moved to the door, stepping outside just as the drifter was mounting his horse. With a quick and deliberate movement, Jack aimed their revolver. "Hold it right there," Jack called out. The drifter froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his own weapon. "Who are you?" he demanded, turning to face Jack. "I'm Jack Carter," Jack said firmly. "And I'm here to find out what you're up to. Drop the satchel and dismount." The drifter hesitated, then slowly lowered the satchel. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Jack's. "You're making a mistake, Carter. You don't know what you're involved in." Jack's grip tightened on the revolver. "Maybe so, but I'm not backing down. You've got answers I need." The standoff was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats and the distant sounds of nature. The drifter's expression hardened, and after a long moment, he slowly raised his hands in surrender. Jack approached cautiously, securing the satchel and inspecting its contents. The papers inside confirmed their suspicions. Detailed plans and notes about the Westwood Ranch and other targets, along with maps and personal annotations. As Jack secured the drifter and prepared to head back to town, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the full picture remained elusive. The drifter's motives and the true extent of the threat was still unknown. With the evidence in hand and the drifter in custody, Jack rode back to Deadwood Ridge, ready to confront the sheriff and piece together the next steps in the investigation. The Wild West was full of secrets, and the truth was beginning to emerge from the dust. The sun was setting as Jack Carter rode back into Deadwood Ridge, the drifter securely tied and sitting on the back of Jack's horse. The town, bathed in the warm glow of twilight, seemed almost peaceful in contrast to the tension of the day's events. However, Jack knew that beneath the calm surface, a storm of revelations was brewing. As Jack approached the sheriff's office, the town's residents, curious and concerned, watched from a distance. The sheriff, Tom Bennett, was waiting outside, his expression a mix of relief and anticipation. "Sheriff Bennett," Jack called out as they dismounted, "I've got the drifter you've been hearing about. He's got quite a bit of explaining to do." Bennett's eyes widened as he saw the drifter, still bound and looking sullen. "Well, I'll be. You actually caught him. Let's get him inside and see what he has to say." Inside the sheriff's office, the drifter was seated at a desk, his hands still bound, but his demeanor defiant. Jack and Bennett stood nearby, ready to interrogate him. The drifter, now known as Cole Reynolds, glared at them with a mixture of defiance and unease. "I'm not saying a word without a lawyer," he declared. Jack leaned forward, their tone calm but firm. "You don't need a lawyer, Cole. You need to answer some questions. Why were you snooping around the Westwood Ranch and collecting information on other ranches?" Cole shifted uncomfortably. "I don't owe you anything. I was hired to do a job, and that's all you need to know." Bennett stepped forward, his voice stern. "We know more than you think, Cole. We found your maps and notes. It looks like you were planning something big." Cole's eyes flickered with a hint of fear. "It's not what you think. I was just gathering information for someone who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." Jack's interest was piqued. "Who's this someone? And what's their plan?" Cole hesitated, his resolve wavering. All right. But you have to understand, this goes deep. I was hired by a man named Vincent Blackwood. He's got a lot of influence and a lot of money. He's been planning to take control of several ranches in the area, including Westwood's. The information I gathered was for him." Bennett frowned. "Blackwood. I've heard that name before. He's known for shady dealings, but never anything like this." Jack nodded, piecing together the information. "What's Blackwood's endgame? Why target these ranches?" Cole sighed, clearly resigned to his fate. "Blackwood's after power and control. He's been buying up land and resources, trying to consolidate his influence. Westwood's ranch was just a piece of the puzzle. He wants to control the whole region, and he's not above using force to get it. The gravity of Cole's revelation hit hard. Jack and Bennett exchanged glances, both understanding the magnitude of the threat posed by Blackwood. "We need to warn Lila Westwood and the other ranchers," Jack said decisively. "Blackwood won't stop until he gets what he wants. We have to stop him before it's too late." Bennett nodded in agreement. "I'll get a message out to the other ranchers and make sure they are prepared. You go to Westwood's place and make sure Lila's safe." Jack and Bennett worked quickly. Jack went to Lila Westwood's ranch, arriving just as darkness began to fall. The Westwood ranch was quiet, with only the distant sounds of nature breaking the stillness. As Jack approached the house, Lila met them at the door, her face a mix of concern and hope. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" Jack's expression was serious. "Lila, we've uncovered a dangerous plot. Vincent Blackwood is behind the trouble at your ranch and others. He's planning to take control of the land and won't stop until he gets it." Lila's eyes widened in shock and fear. "What should we do?" Jack reassured her. "We need to prepare for the worst. Get any valuable documents and possessions ready to be moved if necessary. I'll organize a defensive plan with the sheriff and other ranchers." Lila nodded, her determination growing. "I'll do whatever it takes. We can't let him take everything we've worked for." As Jack worked with Lila to make preparations, the reality of the situation became clearer. Vincent Blackwood was not just a threat, he was a force to be reckoned with. The stakes were high, and the time for action was now. As night settled over the Wild West, Jack and Lila finished their preparations. The sense of urgency was palpable. Jack knew that the coming days would be critical in thwarting Blackwood's plans and protecting the community. In the quiet of the night, Jack looked out over the ranch, the stars above seeming distant and indifferent. The battle ahead was not just about saving a ranch. It was about defending a way of life against a powerful and ruthless adversary. With the plan in motion and allies prepared, Jack Carter was ready for the confrontation that lay ahead. The Wild West was unforgiving, but Jack's resolve was unwavering. The showdown with Vincent Blackwood was imminent, and every decision would count in the fight for survival. The dawn of the final day broke with an eerie stillness over Deadwood Ridge. The town was a hive of activity as Jack Carter, Lila Westwood, Sheriff Bennett, and the gathered ranchers prepared for the impending confrontation with Vincent Blackwood. The air was charged with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Everyone knew that today would determine their fate. Jack and Lila had spent the night coordinating with the sheriff and organizing the ranchers. They set up defensive positions around the Westwood Ranch, fortifying key entry points and ensuring that everyone knew their role in the defense. as the sun rose, casting long shadows over the landscape, Jack stood atop a small hill overlooking the ranch. Their eyes scanned the horizon, waiting for any sign of Blackwood's forces. The calm before the storm was almost tangible. Sheriff Bennett approached, his face lined with determination. "We've got everyone in place. The ranchers are ready, and the defenses are set. How are you holding up?" Jack nodded, their gaze still fixed on the horizon. "We're as ready as we can be. But we need to stay sharp. Blackwood's not going to take this lying down." Just then, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger as a group of riders approached. It was Vincent Blackwood and his men, their presence announced by the unmistakable thundering of hooves and the murmur of voices. Jack's pulse quickened. The moment of truth had arrived. They turned to Sheriff Bennett and the others, rallying them for the imminent fight. "It's showtime. Remember, we're fighting for our homes and our families. Stay focused, and we'll get through this." The ranchers took their positions, their faces set with resolve. Jack, Lila, and Bennett joined them, readying their weapons and preparing for the confrontation. The sound of approaching riders grew louder, and the tension in the air was palpable. As Blackwood's men reached the outskirts of the Westwood Ranch, they spread out, taking cover behind whatever they could find. Blackwood himself rode at the front, his imposing figure easily recognizable. His eyes scanned the ranch, calculating and cold. Jack stood by Lila, their heart pounding as the standoff began. Blackwood's voice rang out, echoing across the open land. "This is your last chance, Westwood. Surrender now, and we might show you some mercy. Resist, and we'll take what we want by force." Lila's face was a mixture of defiance and fear. "We're not giving up our land or our freedom. We'll fight for it." Jack glanced at Sheriff Bennett, who gave a curt nod. "All right, let's do this." The first shots were fired, breaking the silence of the morning. The clash of gunfire and the cries of men filled the air as Jack and the ranchers engaged Blackwood's forces. The Westwood Ranch, once a peaceful homestead, had become a battlefield. Jack moved with precision and purpose, their actions a blur of speed and accuracy. They provided cover for the ranchers, expertly targeting Blackwood's men and forcing them back. The fight was intense, with each side determined to gain the upper hand. Amidst the chaos, Jack saw Blackwood moving with a group of men toward the main house. Realizing the threat to Lila and the other defenders, Jack pushed forward, cutting a path through Blackwood's forces to intercept him. As Jack reached Blackwood, the two faced off, their eyes locking in a fierce confrontation. Blackwood's face was a mask of anger and frustration. "You think you can stop me, Carter? I've come too far to turn back now." Jack's voice was steady, their resolve unwavering. "You're finished, Blackwood. You underestimated the people of this land and their will to fight for what's theirs." The two men engaged in a fierce duel, each move calculated and precise. Jack's experience and determination clashed with Blackwood's brute force and cunning. The battle was evenly matched, each side pushing hard for victory. Just as it seemed the fight could go either way, a sudden burst of gunfire rang out. One of Blackwood's men had turned on him, a betrayal that shifted the balance of power. Jack seized the opportunity, disarming Blackwood and forcing him to the ground, with Blackwood subdued and his men either captured or retreating. The tide of the battle turned in favor of Jack and the ranchers. The remaining forces were quickly rounded up and taken into custody by Sheriff Bennett and his deputies. As the dust settled, Jack and Lila stood together, surveying the aftermath. The ranch had been defended, but the cost had been high. The landscape was marked by the scars of the battle, and the sense of victory was bittersweet. Lila turned to Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. You saved us all." Jack nodded, their gaze sweeping over the ranch. "We fought for what was right. It's a hard-won victory, but it's worth it." Sheriff Bennett joined them, his expression one of relief and satisfaction. "Good work, Carter. The town owes you a debt of gratitude. With Blackwood gone, we can start to rebuild and move forward." As the sun set over Deadwood Ridge, the town began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The battle was over, but the scars of the conflict would remain. Jack Carter, having played a crucial role in defending the land and its people, knew that their work was far from finished. With the immediate threat dealt with, Jack took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The Wild West was a land of challenges and dangers, but it was also a place of resilience and courage. And as Jack prepared to move on to the next adventure, they knew that the spirit of the frontier would always be a part of them. In the fading light of the day, Jack rode out of Deadwood Ridge, leaving behind a town that had been saved by the courage and determination of its people. The Wild West was vast and unpredictable, but Jack Carter was ready for whatever lay ahead.